Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of the Professional Care Workers Week 2023. This morning, I am joined by the most amazing people in the sector that have very kindly agreed to give us 2 hours of their time this morning. So we're going to talk about future of social care, especially with a focus on care workers, what other countries are doing and the learning we can take from that, some of the reports that have been launched recently, yesterday even, and today, so very fresh reports as well, and just a general conversation about where we think social care needs to go. So, like I mentioned, I'm joined by some wonderful people. For the sake of leaving as much time for the conversation as possible, we're not going to do a big round of introductions at the beginning, but everybody will be introducing themselves as they are speaking, and I'm sure you know all of them very well, but just in case you don't, I think it will be good to have those introductions. So I think first of all, and I'm going to go around my screen as I have people on it, Nathan, could I ask you, where do you think we need to be in 5 years' time, including should we register care workers or not? Any learnings that you have maybe from other countries or reports that you've come across recently, just share with us, where do you think we are and where we should be?
Thanks, Carolina, and good morning, everyone. I'm Nathan Jones. I'm the Senior Policy and External Affairs Officer at the National Care Forum, and we are the voice for the not-for-profit care and support sector in England. So it's a very good question, and I think how I'm going to start answering that is just kind of giving a bit of context of where we're at currently, both in England, but also thinking about where we are globally, because we held a conference a couple of weeks ago with a number of organisations from around the world at the Global Ageing Network Conference in Glasgow. And it's very clear that countries all around the world, no matter if they're high income or low income, are all grappling with this issue of how do we care for people in our society, and how do we make politicians and wider society actually recognise the value and the just the value that that actually brings. So I won't dwell on this too long, but as everybody will know, there are massive workforce shortages in England. 152,000 vacant posts at the moment. While that's an improvement over last year, a lot of that improvement has come from the fact that we're relying quite heavily on international recruitment, about 70,000 people over the last year. Pay is too low for the work that's done by people in the sector. Pay terms and conditions need to be improved. And there's a very, very disjointed government reform programme, which has had its money cut last Easter in half for workforce, from 500 million to 250 million. And there's various different work streams happening, but none of them are actually dealing with the core issue of pay. It's sort of dealing with lots of stuff to do with terms and conditions and that sort of stuff. And so I guess the question then, in terms of where do we want to get to and how do we get there? The National Care Forum has been calling for care work to be recognised as intrinsically skilled and valuable, and for it to be remunerated, if I can get that word right, to reflect that. At the moment, far too many people are working on minimum salaries, or the progression through care isn't there because the salary doesn't match the progression through the different posts. So this is something we've got to change. So a number of things that we're asking for care workers to be paid according to the skills and competencies determined by an independent review body, aligned at the very least with NHS agenda for change pay bands, and that must be fully funded by local or central government funding models. We can't have a situation where these new standards are put in place, but the funding for them doesn't come from any future government. We needed a long-term workforce plan that thinks about the immediate term as well as the medium and long term, that aligns with what's happening in the NHS and thinks about how we create roles and pathways within social care, not leading out of social care, and give people that real vision, particularly younger men, a real vision of working in the sector. And lastly, I think we definitely support the call for professional registration and the establishment of a professional body to represent care workers. And I think that will only work if it comes with the pay terms and conditions alongside it. And I think the fundamental thing that the reason we're pushing for that is simply the lack of power in the voice of care workers at the moment. I think there's the poor relation amongst other professionals in the health and social care system. And we need to be able to give them a voice and give them the ability to push for better change and better skills and better qualifications and just have their voice heard. So that's kind of where I want to see us get 5 years time, where social care, people who work in social care, it's seen as a valuable career. More people are working in social care. The stress and the burden is taken off a lot of unpaid carers because the sector expands. And we have a case where we've got people from the NHS wanting to work in social care and vice versa. And us, so the two sides of the health and social care system actually learning from each other, actually seeing that person-centeredness and relational care going in both directions. The last thing I just wanted to touch on, you may have seen yesterday that the Future Social Care Coalition launched a report called Carenomics, and it's quite a useful framing of, I guess, adult reform in adult social care and thinking about the workforce. Because I think far too often we think about social care as a burden and a drain on society, or at least that's the way politicians and that's the way wider debate goes, or our minds immediately go to thinking about sort of older age, end of life, rather than thinking about the fact there are many people of working age who also access social care to live fulfilling lives. And so the Future Social Care Coalition's report makes a very, very good case for thinking about care as a fundamental backbone to our economy. Sort of draws 5 points from that. Talks about investing in social care as enabling growth in our country. Talks about it helping us to unlock the labour market and support business, because we enable more people to go back to work if they want to, of all ages. We enable unpaid carers to go back to work if they want to, more importantly. It helps us support levelling up. Having good social care across the country will start to deal with some of the inequalities that we have, both the inequalities within the workforce, but also inequalities in communities. We need to be able to show that social care is value for money. Investing in social care means that other bits of the public sector aren't as burdened. People don't reach crisis as quickly. And we enable communities to be more resilient and to look out for one another. And I think that brings on the last point in the report, which talks about social care as building a purposeful economy. So rather than just having businesses that push just for profit or push just for a very narrow gain, if we invest in social care, if the government invests in social care properly, we are getting returns in terms of enabling people to live longer, healthier lives. We can rethink what we mean by aging. It enables us to think about the way in which work is carried out in later life. And it's a safe investment because it inherently needs to be sustainable, and it's something that we're all going to need. So I'll leave it there. I just think we need to reframe the way we think about social care and aging as part of this.
Thank you, Nathan. It's very helpful. And I've seen a lot of posts about the Global Aging Conference. It looked like a great event. And I think in terms of the report about Carenomics, it's very useful, isn't it? Having it framed as contribution to the economy rather than social care being a place where money just goes to die and is wasted away. Talking about reports, Martin, you are launching a report today. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Carolina. I'm Martin Green from Care England, and we're a representative body for care providers. And today we're launching our route map, which is intended to be a route map for any new incoming government. And we've made some clear recommendations within that. They are framed in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. Of course, you would expect that the workforce issues are very much the centre of that report. And we really want to move, as Nathan said, towards a different approach to social care workforce. And if we think 5 years ahead, what I would like to see is, first of all, we'd have really clear skills and competency frameworks so that people could have some very recognized portable qualifications so they could move seamlessly between sectors. And one of the other things that we want to see is we want to see this integration approach so that staff in the NHS and staff in social care are recognised absolutely the same. That needs to be about their pay and conditions, but it also needs to be about public perception. So what I'd like to see is the workforce being acknowledged for the tremendous work that they do. And you cannot see the NHS without seeing social care. These are interdependent systems. The other thing that I think we need to do in terms of workforce is and we're making recommendations about the ICSs and their integrated workforce strategies. What we need to see is evidence that they're engaging social care within those, and that these workforce strategies are very clear about the interface between health and social care. And ultimately, we need a system where people can move seamlessly between both bits of that system, just as citizens do. I think also we've got to acknowledge that there needs to be some really clear career pathways so that people know that they're on a career pathway. I think it's also important to recognise that people may step on and step out of their careers, but they should be able to know at which point they return, and that their status and their work is being validated. So I think we've made some recommendations about that. We've also said there should be a minimum care wage. And as Nathan said, one of the things that we don't want to see is a lot of recommendations for government that are not funded. So these things have got to be funded so that they're absolutely deliverable across the sector. I think we also need to acknowledge that the future is going to be about technology and how we can harness the benefits of technology so that when we do have colleagues working directly on that relationship-based care, they have the opportunity to form those relationships, and that as much as possible of the administrative burdens are taken away and technology is used. In relation to technology, though, I think we should be really clear that technology should be judged firstly by what it delivers for the person who uses services. It should enable them to have more choice, control, autonomy in their lives. And that should be the very clear basis for the first success criteria of technology. And then secondly, it must improve administrative processes, give really clear audit trails for regulators, and also save money. And the workforce needs to be really involved in the development of that technology so that we can really see what benefits are going to accrue to people who use services as well as to organisations and businesses. We also want a very clear workforce strategy from government. You know, it's quite ridiculous to talk endlessly about integration and then to deliver an NHS workforce strategy and not to deliver a social care workforce strategy. What people need to understand is that if we get social care right, there'll be less pressure on the NHS, and we need staff that can move between those two systems. So we've talked about pay, we've talked about training, we've talked about career pathways and professionalism. We definitely want to see a register of social care. And I think that's another important part, not only of acknowledging the professionalism of the sector, but also helping people to understand where people are and also what their training and development has been. And then it's a real opportunity to have a centralised approach to how the workforce is developing and is delivering in the future. So I think those would be my headline things for the things that governments need to do in order to create a workforce that is fit for purpose in the 21st century, that acknowledges the professionalism and skills of these incredible people, that is attractive to new entrants. And, you know, Nathan mentioned the issue of we need more men in social care, and we do. And one of the things we've got to do is we've got to start making this a destination for people who are developing their careers. And that needs to be really thought through in terms of how the career pathway is developed. And the final thing I would say is we need to start thinking about fishing in new ponds for our workforce. So traditionally, we have tried to get our workforce from the same places as other parts, like the hospitality sector, the retail sector. What we need to know is we should acknowledge the tremendous skills and the great core values that people who work carers have, who might now have time to be able to move into a paid caring role. But of course, they might not want a 17.5 or a 35-hour week, but they have a contribution to make. And we should make sure that it's very, very flexible as a career choice so that we can attract more people in. I think of early retired people who could make a huge contribution to our workforce if we gave them a really clear career pathway and recognise that they might be working less hours, but they are no less than professional. So I think that's all I want to say, Carolina.
Thank you, Martin. Very comprehensive, very clear asks that you've got as well. Thank you, very helpful. Nadra, could I go to you now, considering that we've heard from NCF, Care England, so from point of view of National Care Association, could you tell us more about where you are in terms of registration and general future of social care, especially with the election coming up next year?
Thank you. Yes, National Care Association represent predominantly the small to medium-sized providers. So we are looking after the kind of the bulk of the sector, who face some considerable challenges right now. We all know that the SMEs will struggle; they will be the ones that are suffering. But having said that, I think if we look at the question that you've asked, which is around the projection for the coming for the next 5 years, so that's half a decade, and to do that, look back on the past half decade or even decade, and actually what we know is that nothing moves very quickly in social care, and there are always barriers to why that doesn't happen. And I think if I had a magic wand around the next 5 years, what I would like to see is first and foremost is to look at the image of social care. Why do we have such a poor image? Why is it that we constantly get this really poor, negative stories? You know, the NHS can have major scandals, but they don't get the negative perspectives put into there. So I think for us, there is a major job around the positivity of social care. And one of the things I think we all need to be doing, you know, wherever we are, whichever influence we can have, is to talk up social care, is to consistently talk up social care and not look at the barriers and not talk about all the things that haven't or couldn't have happened. So I think for me, that is a key part of everything that we do as we project forward. Our workforce, I know, it is one of the most committed workforces ever. I've got 3 award ceremonies this week, all centered around social care. And I went to one yesterday, which was actually set up by the BBC. So these are really, really good things. The image is there. People are talking about social care in a positive way. I think what we also need to do is stop comparing ourselves with the NHS. We are very much standalone. We have the largest workforce around. We look after more people. And yet we always spend a huge amount of time talking about the comparators with the NHS. But if we spent that time and that energy talking about the positivity of what social care does and the value of social care and the value of our workforce, I think that would just change the narrative a little bit. And I think for me, that is really a key point about the changing the narrative, the value of social care to that individual. We need to be talking much more about the individuals that we support, and there are going to be more individuals that we'll be supporting. The demographics are very, very clear. We know that the impact of COVID-19 has brought more and more people into the mental health arena, and there'll be more people suffering with some of those conditions, and they will fall into the social care sector. So this is not just about older people. This is a huge, huge sector. I always refer to it as a patchwork quilt of services that make up. And so the care workers that are involved in every bit of that are often unrecognised. Some of them will be paid, some unpaid. We may all have views around that, but all of them make that difference to an individual's life. And for me, that is the key to how those individuals perceive what social care is. And if we spoke to all of them receiving care and benefiting, you'd get a really positive picture. There will be some negativity. I don't doubt that at all. And I was, as I was giving my kind of presentation speech yesterday, I was saying, I know there is poor care, but we actually pay somebody as providers to make that happen. And I know Bhavna's on the call, so she'll know what I'm trying to say. You know, they are funded to eradicate poor practice. So we have to push that to them and consistently make sure that if anyone's in any doubt, I'm talking about the Care Quality Commission, if anyone's in any doubt, you know, that for me is a real key part of what we do. So if we look at the value of social care and we look at the projections, and I joined the Common Age Board last week at their request after 2 years of saying no, because I felt actually suddenly there was this, the world is big and it's Commonwealth countries, and there's huge amounts of work to do across the world. And those Commonwealth countries who need support from us, we have a duty to try and support them. We're trying to take in international recruits because we need them in the UK, but we also have a responsibility. And, you know, when somebody from South Africa is telling me that half the people who train as doctors actually don't work in South Africa, that's quite a big figure, and that's a huge drain on that country. So there is a moral responsibility. There's some merit in us thinking about that as well, if we're looking at a global approach, which I think was part of your question about what we're learning from other countries. But if we then look at our own country and what's happening here, then we do have to wonder why we still have these enormous workforce shortages, and that has got to be around the investment. The investment piece is really important in this, but part of that investment piece is there is a real lack of value, of acknowledgement around the providers who invest their own money, take out mortgages, work their fingers to the bone in order to deliver that care service. We don't acknowledge them at all, actually. We don't talk about them, but they're the ones who are bringing that value, that vision, and there are some really good examples out there of different visionaries. But let's not forget that small provider who's invested in a 40-bedded service and is running it really well and doing the best that they can for their workforce as well. So I think that investment piece is important. So it's not about just government investing in us, but it's also the recognition of the investment that is there already and talking that up. And I think Martin's, touched on the strategy piece, so I won't repeat what he said. But this, for me, that strategic approach, that it feels like a no-brainer that we should have a register for care workers. It feels like a no-brainer that there should be a workforce strategy that looks at the curriculum and a qualification agenda. And I know Jonathan will no doubt talk to that piece as well, because those are really important things. Where are the leaders coming from? Where are we bringing them in from? How are we valuing them? How are we making that happen? So if you look at the 5-year strategy and you think to yourself, well, if we haven't got leaders, I mean, somebody used this analogy quite recently with me. They said, if you're trying to fill a bath, you have to put the plug in first. And that's about retention, isn't it? That is about retention. That's about moving that retention piece. Recruiting is one piece. Retention is another piece. And so to value the workforce, you need to be able to retain them. You need to acknowledge them. And of course, we need to pay them better. And if I had an ask for government, it would be stop this knee-jerk reaction around social care. Let's talk big. Let's talk big about this and try and get this resolved in a way that makes it sustainable. Fed up of knee-jerk reaction, short, sharp fixes. They're not going to, if we're going to have that for the next 5 years, we'll still be talking about it in 5 years' time. Shall I stop there, Carolina? Because people's hands have gone up, which is really worrying.
No, that's not worrying at all. That's great. Thank you very much, Nadra. I really appreciate it. Jonathan?
Sure. Thank you very much, Carolina. So Jonathan Freeman, I'm CEO of the CareTech Foundation. I am also Group Sustainability for Care Tech and a number of other roles. But I really wanted to jump in because in so many respects, I agree with Nadra that we need to be so much more positive about the sector, about what it's doing. And I say this as a former civil servant back in the day, many, many days ago. It's really easy to ignore this sector. There are too many voices. We're not rallying behind stuff, but also, and I completely understand it, the way successive governments have neglected the sector makes it very, very easy to be cynical and downbeat. It is now on a political agenda. That's a significant win, actually. This was not something that was on a political agenda a few years back. I think as a sector, we need to take the small wins when we can and say, okay, great. Yes, and rather than no, but, which I think we're rather good at in the sector. And I think we need to start really saying, okay, let's build on that. Let's work together. I also think that as a sector, rather than decry what's being done or not being done, let's just start making things happen ourselves. As Nadra says, we are a huge workforce. We've got incredible talent in the sector. We have got some fantastic leaders, many of which I'm honoured to share today's platform with. Let's start actually saying, no, this is why we want to do it. We'll make the change. We talked about leadership. I would like in 5 years, Carolina, to see the social care sector as one where aspiring leaders think that's the sector for me. Forgive me for those who've heard this before, but I got so depressed when I heard one of my daughters coming out of university, talking to some of her friends, and I just overheard one say, yeah, but there's only jobs in social care at the moment. Only in job. No, wow, wouldn't I love to be a leader and have a career in that sector? And that's what we need to shape, that bright, young and older things. So I'm completely with Martin, that people who've maybe had one career and want to switch. Let's start really building a system and a structure, and a number of people, including Nadra, including Martin and NCF, have been part of putting together the business case for a social care leader scheme, based on the lessons from lots of other graduate schemes like Teach First, that shows you can tap into particularly young people's desire to work in a purposeful, value-based system and create a fantastic career, because you can do pretty well if you're good in social care. So let's start bringing those in, and that will directly impact on retention, because people stay because their managers are good, because they're looked after. And if we get those sort of leaders into the scheme, that will create wonders. We do need, Martin's quite right, to look and fish in different pools. We need to be looking at alternative recruitment. We need to be partnering with, the Prince's Trust, for example, who had their NHS, and they've got lots of experience in recruiting the NHS. They've broadened out social care. It's not been fantastic. We need to engage with them more to help them understand, we are different. It is a different sector career, and it's got lots of different opportunities, and you need to approach it differently. But we also need to look at ourselves. Nadra's quite right. We are a patchwork quilt. But the best patchwork is when lots and lots of different people stitch their bits of it together, but what they create is something incredibly beautiful, but they understand how they all link together. We need to start creating schemes like the Social Care Leaders Scheme, or career structures where we're thinking, not, I've got someone great, how can I desperately cling on to them? But how can I allow them to progress, knowing that they're going to move on to another provider, but at some point they'll come back, or someone new. We want them to stay within the sector. We want them to grow and develop within the sector, and really and recognise that. And that means, whether that's for profit, whether that's charity, whether that's local authority, whether that's children's, whether that's elderly care, whether that's specialist care, all of it is one sector. So let's actually try to celebrate that and show the diversity of roles that you can have in the sector. I'm going to do one shout out around sustainability. And it's not, oh, we need to tick the ESG box, we need to be more sustainable. We do. We are miles behind as a sector. So in the next 5 years, I want to see us really take a leadership role in that and show how we can create a much more sustainable social care sector. And a few of us, Avner and others, are involved in some work to try and spearhead that across the social care sustainability lines. But it's not a nice have. This should be how we deliver our work. This is also going to help recruitment and retention because, you know, younger people in particular, but everyone wants to know that, you know, we're looking after the planet, that we're looking after communities, we're looking after people, and it has a direct impact on our bottom line. Yeah, Autumna's just launching its Go Green scheme because they've recognised that people shopping around, which is effectively what they're doing for their care provision, would prefer to go to providers who are looking after the environment and understand their impact. So it's a huge bit. The big message, though, for me is we do have to be more positive. We have to do things like Care Home Open Week, like Care Sector's Got Talent, all of that sort of stuff, where we're looking outwards. The awards are fantastic. We're really good at celebrating success internally, but let's start getting that message out there. Let's own our responsibility for that rather than decry government. Say, let's do it ourselves. Let's actually get on the front foot and really start explaining and celebrating the incredible impact that social care has.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. That's very helpful. And I think on the positivity, yesterday we had a session with Neil from Social Care Future, and they're also working very much on trying to do more positive campaigning around social care. Bhavna and then Nathan.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for arranging this, Carolina. My name's Bhavna Keen-Rao. I'm the Managing Director of BKR Care Consultancy. I come at this from a different angle because my previous hat was that of Care Quality Commission for 23 odd years. It's been an interesting discussion so far, but also, I mean, I concur totally with Nathan, Martin, Jonathan, and Nadra. I think we really do need to start celebrating and getting the positive stories out. The problem we have is that there are so many negativity as well and different voices. We need to become much more joined up in one voice. I've been to a few meetings behind the scene where, you know, with policymakers in Westminster, etc. And they're saying there are so many disjointed voices coming through from social care. It's a difficult one. Well, we're not really different voices. It's just we all come at it with such a passion that it's difficult for some people to digest, I guess. But for me, it's a no-brainer. We should definitely, absolutely have a register for care workers. I think it professionalizes the whole social care sector. I think it's a way forward, but I have been told that it's an expensive way to manage it. Well, I disagree. I don't think it's expensive. I think it's the only way forward. But the psychological aspect of actually trying to professionalize is going to be difficult when we did an experiment as part of the Ethos Foundation on what people think about people working in a hospice to working in a care home. And when you say you work in a hospice, people go, oh, that's a really hard job. That's a really difficult job. But when you say you work in a care home, they go, oh, it's almost like, oh dear, what a shame. But actually working in a care home, in the social care sector, it's much difficult because, especially in the elderly care homes, in a hospice, people are going in knowing that it's end of life. In a care home, older people's care home, they're going in. It's end of life care that they will get, but nobody wants to talk about it. The families don't want to talk about it. So care workers are actually doing this incredible job with the training, etc. And yet we don't recognize, we as a society don't recognize it. I think pay is incredibly important. I think we have to pay people and recognize the value that they add. of course, because as a social care sector, we've always just got on and done it, and we've always found the resources to do it. COVID being the amazing, you know, the workforce just came through amazingly. It showed that with what little we have, we produce amazing results. Well, nobody's going to pay us if we can keep doing that. And we're caught in this ground where we don't do it, we suffer, or our people suffer. We do it, you know, it's going to be the negativity that, oh, you get on with it, you do it. Why change it? So I think those are some really serious things that are going to happen. I think digitalization is an incredible way forward, if done correctly and if done ethically and used ethically. I don't think it's about cutting staffing. It's about being creative with the use of staffing, so staff can do a lot more valuable stuff. And you take them on this journey on digitalization. So I think that could work really, really well. Jonathan mentioned the Social Care Alliance, Sustainability Alliance. Again, I think it's about that whole social bit. We are part of the community, and the community is part of the care home. Bringing those two together, marrying those two together is such an incredible way. Staff are looking to see, are you providing an ethical footprint? Are you doing anything on recycling? When they're looking for jobs, it's about, you know, what else do you provide? Flexibility of workforce. Again, if somebody can work 4 hours a day or 12 hours a day, it really works. We work in care homes when we're troubleshooting, for example. Christmas Day, we break up the shifts into 4 hours. People really like those. There are people who want to stay the whole day, and that's fine, absolutely fine. But many people just want 4-hour shifts, and we'd never have to use agency for that reason. So it's about being really creative, giving back something to the staff. You want staff to be loyal to you, you be loyal to them, give them something back. So those are just few of the things. And I think the regulator really is not engaged in this. I think we have to get the regulators engaged in this.
Thank you very much, Bhavna. One thing that gives me a bit of hope for regulator involvement with the workforce is that in the new framework, there's much more mention of the workforce than it has been in the past, and providers will actually have to prove and evidence supporting their teams, whereas in the past, whenever I asked, I always heard from CQC, workforce is not within our remit. So no, I think it's definitely within.
I think the quality statement are very clear about that, the well-being side, you know, so on and so forth. I think you're really right. But it's about us making sure we hold the regulator accountable and actually working along the statements that they've produced.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. Nathan?
Thank you. Just wanted to a few quick reflections on some of the stuff I've heard. So 100% agree with that vision for a more positive story about what social care is and the career it offers. I think that's something we really need to be telling better and more joined up. And I think just, you know, connecting, you know, the themes about environmental sustainability and, you know, the positive difference that care makes, there's optimism for the future about new types of care roles that will need to be created and exist, you know, to manage that move towards sustainability in both financial and environmental sense, but also how do we use technology in a way that's person-centered and relational, that enhances somebody's care. And I think that's really important, and I think that should need to be emphasized. The other point I wanted to come back to is just want to reinforce something Nadra was talking about when she was thinking about ethical recruitment and retention, and particularly thinking about international recruitment, because we are obviously relying quite heavily on very skilled workers from other countries around the world at the moment. And we can't allow that to become an excuse for the government not to improve the domestic terms and conditions of the workforce for both people who have come to this country highly skilled, but also for people that within the workforce itself, because otherwise we just start to re-entrench this sort of low skilled equals low pay mentality. And we need to push against that for everybody who works in care, whether they're from this country or not.
Thank you, Nathan. Martin?
Thanks, Caroline. I just wanted a reflection on this too many voices. actually it doesn't matter how many voices there are, we are all pretty much saying the same thing. And it's not that we're not consistent, it's that the government isn't listening. And don't assume that if you have one voice, it will automatically mean the government will listen. I was a lead trustee at Age Concern when we were advocating, and I was a strong advocate for the merger between Help the Aged and Age Concern. And one of the things I constantly said was, we'll have one voice. Well, let me tell you, that has not been a successful merger in my view, and we have lost the agenda on ageing. And it was all about the government saying to us, oh, there are too many voices. Well, when we became one voice, it didn't make them listen. So we shouldn't seduce ourselves into believing that somehow there's not cooperation in the sector. And in fact, we've got the CPA, where we do speak with one voice. The problem is not our messaging. The problem is that they're not listening.
Thank you, Martin. Ruby, from the Home Care Association point of view.
Hello everyone, I'm Ruby, I'm the Director of Policy and Practice at the Home Care Association. We represent home care providers both in the state-funded part of the market and in the self-funded part of the market, and our members kind of range from the smallest kind of family-run businesses up to the large franchises. I wanted to echo a lot of what people have said about how we need to talk about the value of social care, but I also wanted to add that it's very easy then to slip into a discussion about care homes, and that is really missing the benefit that social care as a whole brings. And that's not just the kind of home care sector, but it's also thinking about supported living, it's thinking about learning disability services, it's thinking about mental health. And when we talk about the value and benefits of social care and what that does both to the economy and for the NHS, we need to talk about the whole picture of that, and not just kind of slip into the care home space and slip into just talking about care for older people, which can be quite easy. I'm going to focus, unsurprisingly, on some bits around home care, because obviously that's who I represent, but I wanted to kind of start with that bit. I think a lot of this will echo what you've heard from other people, so I will try and cover the key points that other people have fairly quickly. So I think we've all agreed that there's kind of an undervalued care workforce, that there isn't a recognition of the skills within the sector, and what skills are needed for those jobs. I think particularly in home care, there are very high vacancy rates. So we did have a peak of over 14%. That's dropped down to 11.5%, but that's still very, very high. That's significantly above the rest of the economy, and it's also above other parts of the social care sector. I think part of that is because there are some very specific challenges in home care, both about how home care is commissioned, and in particular the kind of poor commissioning practices, so 0-hour commissioning, just paying for contact time, not looking at travel time and waiting time, thinking about commissioning kind of multiple providers in a small area so that care workers don't have good rotas, all lead to poor terms and conditions for care workers in home care. And as a couple of people have raised, I think there's some very specific challenges about the environmental impact as well for care workers. So we're very, very reliant in home care on driving. What does that look in the future, and how are the additional costs for care workers included in things? But I do think there are some opportunities, and I don't want this to just be a negative discussion. I think there are some things that could happen in the next 5 years that could make a real difference. So the first is we have to get it right. We all know we've got an ageing population, that we're going to have a greater number of people who need social care, both at working age, adult age, and in the older adult space. So we need to do something. Part of what I think we need to do is recognise the value of self-funders, particularly within home care. I think that preventative space is really, really important. And actually, when we're thinking about about workforce shortages and workforce planning, we can't just think about what the public sector is commissioning. We need to think about what social care is needed by self-funders, because actually that's hugely important to preventing people from going into expensive hospital settings. It's hugely important in allowing people to live well at home for longer. I think there are some real opportunities within the digital and technology space, but I think, as other people have said, it needs to enhance people's care, but it also needs to improve the experiences of care workers, care managers and providers. So when we're thinking about those solutions, we need to think about involving people who are doing that care work day to day, but also the people who are receiving care. I do think there is a real role for registration. And I think we should try and build on the lessons of the devolved nations. So thinking about what has worked well in Wales and Scotland, and also considering what hasn't worked well as well. So what we don't want to do is find that registration leads to people falling out of the workforce. We need to think about people who are only doing a small number of hours of care work and how registration would work for them. And we also need to make sure that providers have real confidence in that registration. So if we're going to have portable skills, you've got to have confidence in providers, because otherwise they're just going to redo the skills again, and that doesn't work. So learning some of those lessons from Scotland as well. We also think we need to think about the unregulated part of the market. We think that that care work should be regulated, both to protect the safety of care workers and the people who are receiving care. So thinking about what we do with the unregulated part of the market. And then I think we all need to think about how we sell the value of social care, not just to the NHS, but to the wider economy. And as many people have said as well, we need a 10-year workforce plan aligned with the NHS. There has to be career progression. If we don't have career progression and we don't have good pay terms and conditions, we will be here in 5 years' time talking about what we need to do about the social care workforce again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruby. That was very helpful. And I think around registration and learning from other nations, not just about what went right, but also things that could be improved on. I suppose that's the advantage of registers suddenly started in England, that there's all this international learning to be done. And talking about joint voices across the sector or not, I have NCF, NCA, Care England and Home Care Association all telling me that there should be a register and a professional body for care workers. So I think as far as joint voices and messaging go, that's really great, considering that quite a few years back when I first got involved in the whole registration conversation, I don't think people were speaking about it so openly and really asking for it as much as it's happening now. So just personally, I'm very encouraged by that. Charles.
Thank you, Carolina, and thank you everyone for their very interesting contributions. I'm Charles Armitage. I'm co-founder and CEO of Florence, and we build technology to power the social care workforce. I wanted to come in on a few points. One first off is about the role of government, and I think whilst having a strong, consistent lobbying voice is incredibly important, clearly a lot of people on this call today dedicate their lives to doing that. It's I think important not to put too much stay in only being able to generate change if there is government, central government or local government initiative to power that. There are some areas I think where it is inescapable. For example, when it comes to things like local authority funding for care placements, that must have a central and local government input to it. But when we're talking about things that are really owned by the sector, like professional development, career pathways, skills and competency frameworks, and we do have the power as a sector to do those things ourselves. And ultimately, if we want to get those things over the line, trying to go down the route solely of it being owned by government entities means that it's probably going to happen a bit slowly. It's probably going to be susceptible to the winds of political change. So we could be going down a path and things can get blown off by agendas that are totally out with our control. And if we as a sector grab these things ourselves, and as a group of people across different organisations start to initiate these processes, we can create the momentum that that to some extent forces government to support and listen to the sector. So let's take one of the things that I think has been resonates across everyone here. It's around professional career development, professionalisation, skills and competency frameworks. I think probably the most important part of recruitment and retention within the care sector is pay and conditions, and to some extent we as providers have the ability to control that, to some extent we don't. But I think the second piece is all about how we build professionalism within the workforce. No one, I think, wants to feel like they're standing still in their careers or their jobs or their lives. I personally know that feeling of, if I don't feel like I'm progressing or growing or learning, I very quickly go off the boil, and I think that's very much a human trait. At the moment, we have an incredibly weak way of assessing skills and competencies and progression within the care workforce. And I've spent hours looking around on the internet for agreed frameworks for how we define whether someone falls into this bucket or that bucket, or how we could ban people within their roles, and it just doesn't exist. If we got the right people around the table with the right experience across the sector, it doesn't need to be too many people, because that would probably slow things down. You could knock something like that up in weeks or months of discussion. It doesn't need to take years and years of initiative and planning to get those kind of things over the line. So ultimately, I think that's a piece of work that we can, as a sector, come together and agree. We can start to build these things and put them into real life and into the real world, and create that change that we want to see. If we always sit back and say, "Oh, we can't do it until we have the government supporting us," I think we become a little bit of a victim ourselves, when actually we as a sector have a huge amount of power, a huge amount of voices around the table. We have the ability to implement these changes ourselves. So I'm pretty optimistic around conversations like this and how they can be used to drive change in the sector. I think we should be doing more of them, and we should have an agreed set of goals that we're all aiming towards.
Thank you very much, Charles, and thank you for your support with Professional Care Workers Week, and to you and Florence for sponsoring this session in the first place. There you go. That's why we can have these conversations. Zoe.
Thank you. And what fantastic conversation so far. So I'm Zoe Fry, one of the directors of the Outstanding Society. I'm really proud to be an adult social care nurse as well. I think it's absolutely fantastic, all the different care associations coming together. And I think you're right, Martin. We've got a lot of voices and a lot of people doing different things, but actually that's even more powerful, which I think is absolutely amazing. We're very different. We're a community interest company, so we don't inform or influence policy at all. We're all about sharing and celebrating best practice and helping others to improve and trying to be that positive voice. I think what's quite interesting, I see it as quite an exciting time for adult social care, and Ruby, I completely agree. It's not just about residential nursing homes. It's about LD services, domiciliary care, education, research within social care, and it's about celebrating that. And I think what Deborah Sturdy has done, the Chief Nurse for Adult Social Care, is develop the new Social Care Nursing Advisory Councils. And that's going to give a voice for adult social care on the ICBs, ICSs, with all of the 42 ICBs having a nurse from adult social care representing the voice on the table with their CNO to inform what's going on. What I think we've got a problem with at the moment is that there's so much excellent work going on throughout the sector, but it's bringing it all together. What we're finding is that lots of different ICBs are having pockets of really excellent work. Why isn't that being replicated in another ICB? I'm the chair for Sussex, and we had a roundtable event a couple of weeks ago, and we invited 60 people along to that event. And again, there's so much work going on, but I didn't even know of some of the organisations that existed in Sussex. So is there a way that we can signpost all the different national and local organisations to see what is going on, so that we're not having that duplication? I think another priority, and I know that most people have said about raising the profile, really celebrating that a career in social care is such a fantastic opportunity. Where are the student nurses? Why aren't we encouraging student nurses into the sector more? Are we going out to universities? Why don't we have lots of placements within the adult social care sector? Are we growing our own nurses? So to make it sustainable for the future, what can we do about encouraging more student nurses into the sector? And I think changing the poor image, we've talked about, going out to the younger generation, going out to the older generation who might be retiring. I think there's also an element of targeting parents in the local community. So if we change that perception, a parent's going to start to have a positive voice around social care, then their children will say, actually, why haven't I explored work experience in a social care setting? So I see this as a time for a real exciting opportunity for the adult social care sector, and bringing together all the voices in so much positivity to raise a profile.
Thank you very much, Zoe, and a very interesting point on parents. We touched briefly on it yesterday, that there are so many people to influence around being more positive about social care, and especially about social care being a career. And parents and teachers as well are actually people that we also should be looking at, because young people don't make decisions in a vacuum. They're very much influenced by people around them. So thank you. Simon, could I bring you in now with where do you think we should be in 5 years, and anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think 5 years' time, I'd like to see more people getting more care more efficiently and at even better quality. I think that would be my goal. And I think I would start off by looking at that, not with workforce, although I think workforce is really important. I'd start by looking at eligibility. So the most fundamental problem I think we have, if you look back over the last 7 or 8 years, what you see is a reduction of about 60,000 in the number, particularly of older people getting publicly funded care at the time when demand has been increasing. So the gap between that increase in demand and a reduction in people receiving publicly funded care, to me, that is the most fundamental issue that we need to address. And it fundamentally comes about because we have a means-tested system which has got tighter over time and become meaner over time. So I would start there. I think we do clearly have to do something about workforce. There's clearly an issue about pay. I think particularly about pay progression seems to me the most fundamental issue. So yes, there's an issue about the point at which people join, but the reality that if people are only going to be earning 7p an hour more after working in the sector for 5 years, that I think is the most fundamental issue. We're doing a piece of work at the moment. Some of you know, because I've spoken to you about it, about how we can attract younger people more effectively into the care workforce. So the points people have made earlier about we can't continue to fish in the same pools. I think in a few years' time, I'd like to see more younger people coming into the sector, partly because we have to recruit more younger people if we're going to expand the number of care workers we need, but also that it would be a really good symbol and a marker that the sector had got better about talking about itself and promoting itself and creating the beginnings of a sector where people can make a career. One of the things that I found really interesting having the conversations with providers that we've spoken to so far is a couple of things really, actually. One is that we've spoken to lots of individuals who are now at very senior roles within their companies who started off as care workers at a young age in their company. And so that potential for care to be a route for people who really want to progress, I think is really important. I think the downside that's come across from some of the conversations we've had is that providers who are enthusiastic about young people, who want to encourage young people, also feel that actually they're not the norm in the sector, that there are an awful lot of providers who think young people are too much like hard work. They make assumptions about, sort of Gen Z attitude. Now, I can't evidence that, but it does feel to me that there might be an element of that. So there's probably some things about the way the sector behaves itself that, you know, we have to look very carefully at the way we behave. And I think just briefly, the final thing I would say that I think we need to see more of in 4 or 5 years' time is we really need to see a much stronger user voice within the sector. I mean, I know Clinton isn't here and can't make it, and Clinton obviously is someone who draws on services, but and unless we're really genuinely understanding what people want, not just people who are currently using care services, but people who are outside the system but would like to use care services, and unless we've got that much stronger voice, then I think we will be an inward-looking sector. And I think local authorities have an enormous responsibility in their commissioning practice to engage more carefully with people who draw on services in order to bring that voice into the sector. Because otherwise I do fear that we end up being the same people having the same conversations. And I think the user voice is one of the things that tilts that balance quite importantly. I'll stop at that point, I think.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you for making the point that Clinton, if you were here, would have made very well about including people who draw on social care. You know, one of the reason why I invited Clinton here in the first place, and that we need to listen to what people want now and will in the future, and that it changes because we're talking about different people. And simple examples of that people talking about is the music that is currently being played, let's say, in care homes, is not the music that people want to listen to in 10 or even 5 years' time, and that we need to be on top of it and what people want and need, even in simple things like that. Thank you, Simon. John, could I bring you in now, please?
Yeah, thanks, Carolina. And hi, everyone. My name's John Glasby. I work at the University of Birmingham, and I run a centre called Impact, which stands for Improving Adult Care Together. And it's the UK Centre for Implementing Evidence in Adult Social Care. So we work all across the UK, trying to get evidence of what works used in practice to make a difference to services and to people's lives. And when we talk about evidence, we don't just mean insights from research, we also mean insights from the lived experience of people who draw on care and support or who are carers. And we mean the practice knowledge of people who work across different parts of adult social care. And all our delivery models are about practical support in the workplace, so being alongside people in the realities of local practice to draw down insights from evidence, to think of new ways of doing things, and then to work out what has and hasn't worked so that we can try and mainstream and scale up those innovations. I agree with Simon. For me, there's something really, a lot of the things that we've talked about today are really, really important, but they're kind of a means to an end rather than an end in themselves. And there's something about that more outward looking, really positive narrative that people talked about for care that has to be about the kind of lives that we want to lead as individuals who draw on care and support, as families, and about communities. And then a broader debate about, well, how do we use the skills and the funding and the expertise that we've got to try and get from where we are now closer to the kind of lives that we want to lead together. So I've been really inspired by the work of movements that Carolina mentioned, like Social Care Future, in helping trying to set out what success would look like and a kind of vision of where we should all be trying to move. And then all the things that we've talked about today are all really important ingredients. And Martin talked about a route map as well, but it gives you a sense of what success would look like and what to drive at. I suppose for me, we're in a really difficult place right now, really significant workforce, service and financial pressures, and then people who draw on care and support, families and workers, you know, all facing much broader pressures in their lives as a result of cost of living and some of the issues that have kind of increased since COVID. But all those challenges are also opportunities. It feels like doing more of the same isn't going to be enough. We'll have to do something different going forwards. Post-COVID, people are talking about care and support in a way they perhaps weren't before. It feels like there's a kind of window where you could do something differently. And then the kind of demographics and the sheer number of people that are affected by these issues, as people who draw on care and support as carers, as workers, as friends and neighbours of people who draw on care and support. We've got this really weird situation where nobody really knows what adult social care is, and yet it kind of touches all our lives in different kinds of ways. So it feels like there's a sort of demographic pressure to kind of address this as a society. So looking forward 5 years, just a slightly provocative point at fear of not getting invited back. When we talk about professionalizing, I know exactly what we mean, and I'm fully supportive, but we probably just need to be a little bit careful what we wish for and what we mean by that. And I have a non-exec director role in the NHS, and I've seen other groups of workers push for a professionalization. And it's often been nurses or allied health professionals, and they felt that they've had to adopt a model of professionalism that's been defined initially by doctors. And so they've ended up kind of having to be a bit more like doctors in order to argue that they are professional, rather than being able to be really kind of clear and confident and evidence-based in their own profession and the contribution that they make and the ways that they make a difference, and really sort of celebrate some of that kind of difference. So I'm really supportive of valuing care and of paying properly for it, and of recognizing the skills and the expertise that people bring. But there's something about recognizing what's really distinctive and important about care, rather than allowing ourselves to get pushed into a particular model of what a professional is, or how you regulate that. It can distort as well as kind of add value and highlight. I guess looking to the future, I agree about changing the narrative. I think we're terrible in care at projecting an image of ourselves. The number of people I've heard who have said, hey, we've got 150,000 vacancies at the moment, it's awful, please come and work in care. And that just doesn't seem like a very slick way of kind of messaging, rather than the stuff that people on the call today have said. And you know, care changes lives, and it's about relationships and the kind of relationships that we want to have with each other as a society. It's a form of social and economic investment. Why would you not want to be part of that journey with people if you could? Well, yes, we've got 150,000 vacancies, but we've also got 150,000 opportunities to make a real difference. And there's just something about the kind of narrative that we can fall into too easily. I think there's something that's really important for me, and I agree with Jonathan about bottom-up innovation. There's a window where we can really push for some of the national changes that we'd all like to see, and that might work or it might not work, but almost irrespective of whether it works, we still also have to work on the ground in the reality of frontline services to try and make as big a difference as possible. And in the past, when we haven't seen national action, we've had to innovate ourselves bottom up, and I'm just struck by the amount of innovation that there is, often small scale and bottom up and under the radar, all across the sector, all across the UK. We're working in Antrim at the moment, where there are integrated health and social care teams around GP practices. It's led by the voluntary and community sector. And when they identify older people who are quite isolated in the local community, they reach out to those older people and they signpost them to community resources. And when they do that, some money changes hands from the system to those community resources, recognizing that you don't get community resources by accident. You get them because we all choose to invest in them in different kind of ways, whether that's through our time or our money. We worked in Devon, who ran an appreciative inquiry about what's great about care work, and then tried to win over their partners to really kind of promote and value care as a profession. We've got projects all over the UK around creating neighbourhood teams, which are partly about integrating health and social care, but they're really about then integrating those teams into local neighbourhoods, both into community resources there, but also working alongside the care providers in those areas, so that we're breaking down some of the barriers that there might be between communities, care workers, and different health and social care kind of professions in inverted commas. And we also heard of a really interesting organisation that was trying to respond to the cost of how you provide overnight support, where you've got either sleeping in or waking staff, and rather than having waking staff in all their different units across a particular city, they tried to negotiate a situation where they would have a central hub of waking staff who could be available in an emergency to go out to different units across the city, or could be available on the phone. And that would reduce the amount of waking staff that were needed in all the individual units. And then commissioners would use some of the savings against some of their cost pressures, but then they'd provide some of those savings back to that care provider so that they could pay people better in the first place. So they would just, now that's either a really good idea or it's a bad idea. I don't, it's hard to tell looking in from the outside, but it felt like a genuine attempt to say, irrespective of what's going on in the wider world, how could we use some of what's currently in the system a bit differently or a bit better to try and achieve better outcomes by coming together to try and work on that with each other rather than trying to do it separately. And looking forward, I just wonder, alongside pressure for national change, whether some of the solutions are in our own hands and may come bottom up, almost in spite of some of our systems rather than necessarily because of them. I hope that's wrong and we see really radical national action quickly, but experience over time has taught me that it's never all it's cracked up to be, and that innovation bottom up may carry on being really, really important. And I think the final thing I'd say as part of that is I wonder whether we all have roles to play in our day jobs, but also as taxpayers and voters and as citizens who contribute to these kinds of debates in our neighbourhoods and in our private lives, the advice and support that we provide to colleagues who are trying to access health and care, just the kinds of I sometimes wonder if we end up with the sort of care services that we deserve as a society, and that some of this might have to start with better valuing people who draw on care and support, and therefore better valuing the people who work with them, and whether that's a route into more prominent, more visible, more valued services in the longer run. And those are kind of social choices, some of which we help to make as private individuals, irrespective of our day job. So, Caroline, I hope that's helpful, just in terms of a kind of maybe a slightly different perspective. But I do wonder whether starting with the kind of lives that we all want to lead together as individuals, as families, and as a society is perhaps just a more kind of positive and inclusive way of having the debate with a broader audience, because you can then articulate the difference that we make to people as they lead chosen lifestyles and more ordinary lives.
Thank you very much, John. That was very helpful, and thank you for sharing work of impact. And I hope people get involved. There are opportunities to get involved and apply to be part of different projects. I think on the note about being positive, there is something that when you support people, as a former care worker myself, that feeling of fulfillment and that warm feeling in your heart, in your tummy, that you get when you support people. The problem is we can't really bottle it up and give it to people to convince them that this is one of the reasons why working in social care is so great.
Yeah, but even when you said that, Carolina, your face just changed. You know, your kind of body language changed on the call, and you could just see kind of you remembering people you'd met and relationships that you'd built, and it was just lovely to hear you say that kind of thing. I know you're a massive advocate of that at the best of times, but honestly, your body language just changed as you started to talk about it. And I was a care worker too. I went to quite a traditional school, and you could either, on a Friday afternoon, you could either do a kind of military option, which is what you were meant to do. And if you refused to do that, they punished you by making you visit local older people in the community. It was meant to be a punishment. So I did that, loved it. As soon as I got to university, looked for a voluntary opportunity to carry on doing the same. And I ended up, as a kind of care worker, then as a social worker, then working in kind of adult social care. And it all came out of those relationships that I built as a sixth former, actually just visiting local older people in the community. So there's just something about care changes lives. It's made me a different person. It's changed how I live my life. It's changed how I try to bring up my children. It's given me a career. I'm just so grateful, and I know everyone on the call listening and speaking has got stories like that. I guess just the more we share that with people, the more it just helps to change the nature of the debate a little bit, really.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. Will, would you like to come in now?
Thank you, Carolina. Hello, everyone. I'm Will Blackwell. I'm CEO at Tomorrow's Guides, and we've got the websites carehome.co.uk and homecare.co.uk, which aim to help care seekers find the right care and job seekers find the right care job. On our websites, we've got 350,000 reviews, and in these reviews, every day we see, the brilliant and highly important work of care workers, and how they've gone above and beyond, and the immense gratitude from those receiving care and their families. And out of the various different categories of ratings, it's the category staff that has the highest ratings, all of which reiterates what we know, the incredible positive impact of care workers. And I think it is, as lots of people have said, very important to get this positive message out there. And like many of you said, I think care workers need to be, pay needs to be increased in recognition of the complexity and importance of the role. There needs to be more emphasis on career pathways, pay progression, training and support, and we need to use technology more effectively. I'm uncertain the best way to achieve these aims, but that's why I'm here today, to learn more from all of you and hopefully be able to support initiatives going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Will. That's very helpful, and I think it's always interesting to hear different people's point of view. And every call like this, we all learn something new. I think I've heard from some people saying, "Oh, what's the point? Everybody says the same thing over and over again." But I don't think that's true. I think we all come at it from a different angle, and that's the reason why I've invited all of you as well, to hear those different points of view and how you all think it could all come together. Thank you all. Jane.
Thanks, Carolina. Hi, everybody. I'm Jane Brightman. I'm Assistant Director in the Digitising Social Care team. So we've talked a lot about digitising today, so hopefully I can do some shameless plugs for some of the offers that we have. So this is a Department of Health and Social Care funded programme. There's lots of kind of techie stuff that's going on behind the scenes, helping us to share data across health and social care, looking at interoperability and those sorts of things. But some of the things that I want to share with you today are more kind of offers for care providers, care managers and care staff. So next week we launch a new Digitising Social Care website, which will share all of these offers. Everything is free, everything is funded. So there'll be lots of digital skills, training opportunities. We've developed a digital skills framework with the sector. So we've looked at some of the things that people have talked about today: ethical use of technology, person-centred care when using technology. Those are all key parts of the framework. But we've also looked at the kind of more important, boring side of things. So, data protection, cybersecurity, all of those kind of things. So hopefully we've pulled in the full gambit of being more digital across the sector. We're developing some e-learning modules, which will be based around each of the 7 themes of the framework. So those will be available free for you to take. And also we are developing a level 5 digital leadership qualification, again free, aimed at kind of managers and leaders across the sector. So people who are making purchasing decisions about technology, rolling them out, implementing them in your service and supporting your staff to use that technology. I think we are in a really exciting space in terms of social care and digitisation, actually more exciting than the NHS is. And we've talked, Nadia and others have talked today about how we compare ourselves to the NHS. We're better in terms of digitisation. And I don't say that lightly. Actually, we are in a much more free opportunity space. NHS is tied into some really massive systems which have quite a big monopoly across healthcare trusts. We don't have that in social care. People have talked about innovation. We're much more able to innovate in an agile way in social care. So it's really exciting to see some of the things that are happening across the programme. So the programme is working this year and next year. And like I say, there'll be lots of opportunities, free funding opportunities. And we're looking at how we can evidence the impact of different types of technology that care providers are using. So really starting to build that evidence base to help care providers and care managers to make those purchasing decisions. You know, what works, what doesn't, what's going to cost me, what's going to be funded by the NHS or the government. So hopefully we can help bring some of those opportunities to you. But I also wanted to talk today about another thing, which isn't digitising social care, but is focusing on kind of the biggest area of our workforce, which is our female workers. We are the monopoly in social care, and actually the majority of our female workers are kind of 40 plus, and that means that they will be experiencing the menopause at some point, or going through the menopause, or having gone through the menopause. And it feels like a really odd kind of segue to talk about the menopause, but I think it's really important that in 5 years' time we have a much better strategy to support our female workers who are experiencing the menopause. You know, the NHS England have a really great policy that they've developed. There is you know, buckets of support for female colleagues in NHS. There is nothing in social care, and I think we have to get better at recognising, you know, the impact that it has on our female colleagues, and just how much a toll it can take on the workforce, who, you know, we know are working really hard in incredibly complex circumstances. So I think for me, I would really like to see us get better at recognising things like the menopause for our female colleagues, and also kind of our neurodiverse colleagues. Again, we have a kind of really strong contingent of colleagues in health and in social care who are neurodiverse, so, you know, ADHD or autism, and we need to get better at supporting our colleagues, you know, through kind of strategies, training, support, and better awareness for managers and leaders and employers. So again, that's another area that I'd really like to see us focus on in the future for our workforce. I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you for bringing up menopause and neurodiversity. I think what we are still lacking, and like you said, what we need to do better at, is having the same person-centered approach to the workers as we are expecting them to have to the people they support. We need to support care workers, see them as a whole person with a life outside of a job, with a family often, and with their needs that we need to address and support. Because too often I still sit in conversations where care workers are spoken as tools to deliver care, not human beings with their own rights and needs. And that's, for me, really the most important thing of where the conversation needs to change, and where maybe there'll be more respect, recognition of the work that care workers do, once they are not thought of and spoken about as disposable tools. One goes out, another one comes in, anybody can do the job. The job is easy because, you know, anybody from the street can come and do it, etc. So thank you, Jane. Sanjeev.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sanjeev. I'm the Director of Care and Quality and Policy for Home Instead. I think the blessing of going at the very end is to say I agree with all of the above, but I probably will just share, I suppose, my impressions. I'm 14 months into my role. I am a pharmacist by background, particular cancer care for breast cancer and haematology for pediatrics. So I've worked in the private sector and public sector, and ran a clinical home care business, look after 115,000 patients, which was predominantly outsourced by the NHS. When I first joined Home Instead, I did recognise very quickly that there is no parity or equality of how social care is being treated when you compare it with G4S or other catering companies or any other outsourced provider like Serco. There seems to be disparity between how the NHS picks and chooses the outsourcing of care or services or cleaning contracts, but when it comes to social care, there does seem to be a political piece of resistance, and I struggle to see that. Give you a quick example. When the VAT moved from 17.5% to 20%, the coalition government created a concession that the NHS could outsource to outsourced providers, but VAT would be completely free. you would be able to claim that back from the HMRC. So when I think about where we should be in 5 years' time, I think there should be parity of how other private providers are being treated, particularly from the NHS. The other point I would like to make is about workforce. Caring is a rewarding profession, and it should be perceived as a rewarding profession, as a destination, as opposed to it's seen as somebody who has a misfortune through the usual state system and has ended up in social care. One example I would like to share with you is it took me 2.5 months to persuade the Care Scottish Inspectorate that we have a MND client in Glasgow who needed tracheostomy care. And it wasn't very clear the rules of the game, how to get onto the pitch. Took me 2.5 months to get hold of somebody who would listen to my case. In the end, 2.5 months later, we've trained 14 carers on safe tracheostomy care. That has meant a client has now been removed from ITU at a cost of £1,700 a day. His wife, who is a nurse, was his primary carer, couldn't practice nursing. Now she is at home, the client's at home. She has returned to the nursing profession. To use her words, she has said, "Thank you for giving back my marriage." She is another nurse back into the profession. The 2 daughters are back at university. The client is receiving great care, compassionate care, relationship-based care, but also there has been a significant saving for that particular acute trust. We as an organisation do a very good job talking about the care experience, the impact, the health outcomes. What we don't talk about is the health economic benefits of that care. And that is something that we want to try and drive through empirical evidence. We have a partnership with the University of York to try and identify what are the research priorities for home care and social care in particular, because it is a research desert. And that should helpfully drive some economic decisions when we are speaking with the Treasury, because unfortunately, decisions are made at the Treasury. So we do have to be better at articulating what is the health benefit for the social budgets as well as the healthcare budgets going forward. So I think those are my initial takes from this conversation, is that if you build a rewarding professional pathway for carers, most are interested in developing their skills, and that is what we have seen. So the work that Deborah Sturdy has done about delegating healthcare tasks, that has created a massive opportunity for our carers who have become a little bit stale with companionship or personal care and are really hungry to grow. So our model is that we would reward them more from a rumination perspective, give them a slightly heightened perception within the organisation, but more importantly, give them the framework so they can make these leaps, become more technically advanced. And the other thing I would say is that we did partner with the NHS on training, and that really removed any political barriers of, are these people capable? Do they care as much as we do? All those things that sometimes start to become a prickly pieces of friction, those things were disappeared by having more collaborative relationships with the NHS. So that's my tuppence, Carolina. I hope that adds a bit of colour to the discussion.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I think, when you mentioned different ways of commissioning or outsourcing in the NHS and how differently other providers, other companies are treated compared to care providers, and that's forever an issue, really, isn't it? And then in terms of delegated health tasks, I am worried that you said your organisation, Home Instead, is going to pay care workers more. But I am worried that there will be cases where care workers yet again will be expected to do more, because some of those delegated health tasks they've been doing, we've been doing as care workers for decades, really. But the funding won't follow, especially from local authorities, and they won't be paid more. Then no doubt they'll be, and that's what we've had, haven't we? We've had more and more responsibility being pushed onto social care from the NHS, from district nurses, from wherever else, but the funding not following it, and care workers continue to be on, average minimum wage, and that's, that is my worry around that. And you're right, care workers want to do more. When I was a care worker and I was doing stomach care, catheter care, cancer care, all sorts of things. And I remember speaking at the BGS, British Geriatric Society conference a few years back, telling geriatricians and geriatric nurses about no, care workers can't do that. A care worker couldn't possibly have anything to do with stomach care or support. So yeah, but I think the important part around that is for care workers to be excited and have access to being able to do more things when they want to, but to be paid for it appropriately, because it can't continue being so badly funded, or for the funding not to really follow. Ruby, if I could just ask you to wait if I go to Deborah, because she's not been given an opportunity to speak yet today, and I'll come back to you, Ruby. Is that okay? Brilliant.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah Rosansky. I'm Director of Policy, Research and Information at the Social Care Institute for Excellence. I will try not to repeat what I've heard, but I may refer to some of your comments for things that we would also support. Our starting point at Sky is the quality and safety of social care and the needs of people who draw on care and support. And I think that's really important, and I appreciate that everyone has that as their core mission. But what others were saying, and particularly Sanjeev just mentioning now from Home Instead, is the rising sort of complexity of care needs over time. And in addition to the issue around delegating health tasks, what we're finding from our own research with frontline workers are real gaps in knowledge and skills for how to work with people who have these complex conditions. It's more than just clinical knowledge, it's understanding of some of their basic conditions. So for example, some of our recent research has drawn out a lot of questions around things like dementia care, the role of personal care in prevention, assistive technology. Some of those ideas have also been raised elsewhere. What we're finding is that if you take a broad view of social care, not just for older people, but for people with learning disabilities and other disabilities, there are a lot of lessons from the COVID pandemic experience, which have not been fully adopted by commissioners. So I won't repeat some of those things. I think they're well documented, but we had a workshop last week with people with learning disabilities and commissioners, and it brought out a lot of insights and challenged a lot of behaviors and assumptions about how to support people to live their best lives. So again, stressing the importance of co-production and involving people so that we actually can deliver high quality and safe care is really important. I won't address the macro issues, except to say that in 5 years' time, our expectation is that we're not just focused on finding people to fill the gaps in, the recruitment gaps, but also that we're really clearly taking forward retention strategies that make a difference to people. And there may be some more research that we need to do with providers about what's working and how to expand or scale some of those approaches. We think that possibly, I think it was Ruby who was saying this, investing in people's knowledge and skills and offering them advice and support, which I know you do, Carolina, is really important. We've been hearing a lot about the need for peer support, especially reducing the isolation of care workers who work in home care. There seems to be an unmet need also about well-being support. It's not something we at Sky can offer, but it keeps popping up. People are very pressured, as we know, and there's a lot of burnout. So how do we tackle that in the workforce? What can we offer people across the board, even nationally, to support people? That's more than just finding professional qualifications. It's acknowledging that care work, whilst rewarding, is also very difficult. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think a very important point on home care workers, feeling isolated, lonely, but not just home care workers, because I know many other care workers who go into care home supported services. It's difficult to talk about the job and for other people to understand what it's like, what kind of sense of responsibility that sits on your shoulders. That's not something that you can really close the door at work, walk out of the office and leave behind. People take it home, they don't sleep at night. I think somebody yesterday on one of the webinars mentioned that in their company, one of the issues that care workers started reporting a lot was they can't sleep. They're constantly on this alert of, I need to support. And for me, that's really when it comes into the professional body, not necessarily the registration bit, but a kind of professional body for people, for care workers to have sense of belonging, first of all. because they don't, that there isn't a body for care workers, to champion practices around occupational health, because again, you know, that provision of occupational health depends on the size of the company, finances available, whatever else, and that's difficult for care workers, and a place to challenge policymakers in terms of what shouldn't be expected of care workers, because again, I think care workers remain the only profession where it is an expectation that you will get abused at work and you'll just take it because it's part of the job. I can't think of any other profession that is acceptable. Ruby, I'll come to you, and then John.
I was only going to kind of briefly agree with you on the points around delegated healthcare tasks. I think from our perspective, there's some real opportunities about thinking about progression in the care workforce through delegated healthcare tasks, but we are concerned that there are some areas who are not understanding the costs associated with complex care, and the understanding that you need to be commissioning providers who really understand the delivery of complex care. So we have heard anecdotally of some areas where they are commissioning complex care at £18 an hour, and we simply do not think that that is deliverable or acceptable. And I think there are two elements to it. One is about making sure that commissioners really understand what complex care is, and that there is a real understanding both in local authority commissioners but in ICS commissioners as well, that they fully understand kind of home care as a whole. And the other bit is kind of thinking about how multidisciplinary teams across the NHS, social care and local authorities can work together, because we also need that respect and understanding across the different professions.
Thank you very much, Ruby. And yeah, that's the point. How can you be expected to deliver more complex care at £18 an hour when we know £18 an hour doesn't even cover the companionship care, does it? So how, and going back to Sanjeev's point, I think, you know, trying to make that case, economic case for health costs. If somebody is still in a hospital, this is how much it costs. But if they were at home getting this delivered by the home care workers, it costs less, and you also free up family members to go back to work or to university or to have their lives in the first place. So yes, thank you, Ruby. John.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on what people were saying, Deborah and yourself, Carolina, around health and well-being. We're running a series of projects at the moment around the health and well-being of care workers, and a separate one across Scotland actually around the health and well-being of personal assistants. And in one of those projects, we use an idea that's come from nursing actually about in the jargon, it's care as emotional labour, which is a bit of a weird term, but the sense that we've all got a kind of emotional bank account that gets constantly depleted by the stuff you do and the stuff that you see. And we've all got ways that work for us that help us top that emotional bank account back up. And then when it gets kind of overdrawn, you know, that's when you get burnt out and you're not able to carry on, and there's such serious consequences. And it was really used in nursing by one of my colleagues called Yvonne Sawbridge. Her argument is that care is just an emotional task, and that's not recognised or valued by anybody. And she quoted, they were the chair of one of the regulators, who, when there was one of these debates about compassionate nursing, had said, well, giving someone a smile costs nothing, was the quote. And Yvonne had said, well, that's true financially, isn't it? Giving someone a smile doesn't cost anything financially, but you might be at the end of a 12-hour shift in a busy hospital ward where you're massively understaffed. You've looked after a series of really kind of difficult patients who are ill and in pain and in distress all 12 hours. You work with a final person who's an older person with dementia who might have soiled themselves and might be really upset, might remind you of your own mum who died with dementia in hospital. You sort them out, you take yourself off to the sluice room to clean yourself up and to have a quiet cry, and the sluice room is the only private space that there is. And then you come back onto the ward and you go to the patient in the next bed along to smile at them and treat them as if they're the only patient on the ward. So saying giving someone a smile costs nothing is true financially, but it's not true emotionally. And what would it look like if we started to support the emotional labour of care much better than we do? And she ended up working with the Samaritans actually to look at how they support their volunteers to do such difficult, distressing work as volunteers, and paired them up with nurse leaders who were trying to better support their healthcare assistants. And this particular branch of the Samaritans at the time had a policy where you always had the right to debrief with somebody before you went home. And normally you could do that in between calls. But if it had been a really difficult shift, or if something came in right at the end, this particular branch would actually turn the phones off, because they would rather that people in distress didn't get through first time than they got through to a volunteer who hadn't had a proper chance to debrief. And the Samaritans manager shared that in one of the learning sets we were running, and all the nurse leaders in the room went, it was dead silence. And after a while, someone said, "Do you know what? The NHS equivalent of that is you keep the phones on, come what may. And if something has to give, it's your own health and well-being." And that's in the NHS, where at least rhetorically we say, well, staff are our greatest asset, don't we? We don't always act on that, but we do at least recognise it and say it. I'm not sure we're even close to having that conversation in care, really. So all those projects will look around different parts of the UK at well-being, but looking at well-being by thinking about care as something that's relationship based and something that's emotional, and with that idea of an emotional bank account that we all find different ways to top up. And of all the stuff I've come across in this kind of area, it was Yvonne's work that just spoke the most to me when I think about my own practice and so on. So we're going to be sharing that. There's a really nice discussion paper and a video, and I'll send that through in case it's of interest. But for me, something like that actually is probably more important than some of the things that governments often focus on. It's less tangible, but it's more important, really.
Thank you very much, John. And yes, I think the emotional strain is not talked about enough. We spoke yesterday, a couple of webinars that came up, compassion fatigue. There's only so much you can do till you become quite cold to it, because you experience it so many times as well. And COVID and consequences of COVID, what care workers experienced in terms of people that they were supporting that they've lost, so multiple bereavements at the same time, that there was no time to address, no time to debrief from. I experienced that as a care worker, going somewhere, a person I was supporting passing away, and then me having to go to the next shift after that, or not being able to attend the funeral for whatever reason. And that is really lacking. It's lacking because we don't have capacity in the sector, I think, to deliver it in the first place. You know, funding aside, who would even debrief? Because when you look at managers, they're so overworked and they hold so many roles. So that it needs to happen. It would be quite a big challenge to actually deliver, but it is what care workers are. We monitor a lot of online forums. And this is one of the things care workers talk about and managers the most. They mentally can't do the job anymore. It's not necessarily the money, it's not the physical side of it. Mentally, they can't cope because it affects them and affects their personal lives, but also that expectation that I mentioned earlier, that they have to leave their own lives and their own worries at the door and forever be cheerful with a massive smile, no matter whether they're hungry or not, or whether they can pay their bills or not. Like the last few years as the charity, we've had to deliver over £5.6 million, over 10,000 grants. And that's just tip of the iceberg in terms of people who know about us and who apply. So when care workers are struggling themselves so much to then put the strain of the emotional strain of the job on top of it, it's a lot to ask.
Yeah, there's a great quote from somebody, I think they were a former colleague of Simon's at the King's Fund, actually, and it's in the discussion paper. But they'd said, and this is a health example, but I think it's the same. They said staff don't need more blame and condemnation. They need active, sustained supervision and support. In a high volume, high pressure, complex environment of modern healthcare, it's very difficult to remain sensitive and caring towards every single patient all of the time. We ask ourselves, how is it possible that anyone, let alone a nurse, could ignore a dying man's request for water? What we should also ask is whether it's humanly possible for anyone to look after very sick, very frail, possibly incontinent, possibly confused patients without excellent induction, training, supervision and support. So that was just a way of trying to turn it round a little bit to say, how do we create the conditions where good care can happen? And we've learned that it's really hard to deliver high quality, dignified, person-centered care to other people if you don't feel really cared for yourself. Something's got to give in that situation, hasn't it?
Yeah, I always say it's an incredibly unfair expectation to have of care workers to deliver outstanding care when they're not well themselves. Where are they supposed to take it from to give? Like you say, it's like a bank, isn't it? But it has to be, resource has to be in the bank to be able to draw on it. Thank you, John. Anybody else? We've got 15 minutes left. We've spoken around many different things. So we tried to focus on the future, and I'm very glad about that and staying positive. We can have another 15 minutes of discussion if you've had enough for today and you'd like to call it for the close for today, that's also fine. I'd like to open it up for anybody else who'd like to speak. Nathan.
I was going to ask you a question, Carolina, and maybe what do you want to see like future governments do? What do you want to see providers do? And I guess what do you want to see happen in society over the next couple of years? I imagine it'll be a lot of the same stuff as we talked about, but I'd just be interested to hear.
Thank you, Nathan. I think, yes, a lot of what been said is today, rings true with what we wanted the Care Workers Charity, what I have personally fought for many years. Main thing is recognizing the workforce, recognizing the impact it has on the wider society, on the economy, and that this is important work. I can't think of a more important job than supporting life of another person. I honestly cannot. So finding a way to help people understand that social care is an amazing career that helps you feel that lovely feeling in your heart that you're helping people, but also making sure that we reward people for it properly, because we can't continue taking and taking from care workers who are very giving people in their own nature, taking advantage of them in many ways and giving them very little and expecting them, like I said earlier, go to work hungry but with a massive smile on their face and delivering outstanding care. So for me, that's really the most important thing, the recognition of the workforce and support of the workforce. We're involved in different projects around the pathway, around well-being surveys for the workforce. And all of that is great, but if funding doesn't follow, and then if we give you can get promoted, but we still have the 7 pence an hour difference for somebody who just joins the sector, somebody who's worked in the sector for 5 years, that again remains unacceptable. And that's one of the things that pushes people out of care work, even if they want to. It's like, oh, I've done 10 years, I'm still minimum wage. There is somewhere else that is emotionally much less straining that I can do. Because all care workers want to do, and this is my experience of my colleagues or other care workers I've spoken to over the years, is they want to go to work, have enough time to deliver care that the person wants, deserves, and should have. That's what care workers want. They don't want less work. They don't want easier work. They want to have enough time to deliver great care so the person gets what they need. But they also want to be recognized for it properly. So for me, a professional body for care workers, registration for care workers is one of the ways of achieving that, because I think in the world that we live in, without a professional body registration is going to be very difficult. And I take your point, John, completely, that there are traps there. Teaching profession, there were issues when they went and registered, and they had a body many years ago now. But there are learnings to be done from those mistakes of the past that I think would be helpful, because without that structure, I don't think we'll be able to convince the society, the governments, the politicians to actually take care seriously, because they'll continue thinking disposable workforce, unimportant work that just anybody can do. And we all know, you all know, and you've spoken about it so well today, that that's not the case, really. But for me, it all sits on the workforce, and for people to have space to take off their shoulders the weight that they carry, because it is a weight. And I'm not saying it's more difficult than other jobs, and social care is more important than the NHS, But there is something about having that responsibility. And as a former home care worker, I have to say, especially I think in home care, when you are a lone worker, of somebody else's life being on your shoulders every day, and you have to do your best no matter what. So yeah, thank you for asking, Nathan. I got busy chairing. Anybody else? No, I think that's a good time to finish now. I hope that you all felt that within the numbers that we've had on the call and the time that I've given you enough opportunity to speak. We run Professional Care Workers Week every year because it's important to have that special time for care workers. So do expect me to be emailing you next year and asking for contributions maybe around the different topics. John, you will be invited again. Thank you again very much for your time, because I know taking 2 hours of your day, it's a big ask, and supporting the week. And like I mentioned earlier, we'll be editing the video, putting it on YouTube, sharing it with people. We'll email it to you once it's ready as well, so you can share it with your networks, because you've said so many important things today that people need to hear, whether it's policymakers, but I think care workers themselves as well, so they know what you as leaders of the sector think of them and want them to have. So thank you very much and have a lovely day, and I'll speak to you soon.